Tonight on Nation and Nation, shining a light on racism in the military. A former civilian employee speaks out in an APTN exclusive. Karen Lightbody is suing the government, alleging systemic racism by the Department of National Defense.
We need a huge culture shift. It's not an organization that I can recommend to any of my family members to join right now.
A Mohawk man who joined the Army a year before Oka recalls the racism and discusses why he got involved in the struggle for change.
When you're hearing that from the people who you're supposed to be going into combat with, talking about your mom and your dad and you as savages, it really opens your eyes.
Red dresses across the country mark what the National Inquiry called genocide. But have things improved more than a decade after the first fabric went up?
We want to see outcomes. We've done the inquiry, we've done the advocacy, and now we need implementations.
Welcome to Nation to Nation. I'm Brett Forster. The Canadian Military and Defense Department have faced allegations of racism, misogyny, and white supremacy for decades. They've undergone probes, studies, scathing reports, and class action lawsuits, yet nothing seems to change. Why? To explore this question, I'm joined by Karen Lightbody. She was a civilian employee of the Defense Department for 35 years. She served as co-chair of the Defense Aboriginal Advisory Group, and now she's a lead plaintiff in a class action lawsuit filed last October. Welcome, Ms. Lightbody.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So can you share a little bit of your experience as an Indigenous woman working for DND?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to say that I was an employee with National Defense for over 33 years. And throughout my career, I faced quite a bit of racism and discrimination. Quite frequently, we would hear, or I would hear, microaggressions. And if you could say how often I heard microaggressions, I was there for 33 years and at least once a month. So 12 times 33. So it was quite frequent. Quite often we would hear terms, I say we as in other Indigenous employees, microaggressive terms such as too many chiefs, not enough Indians, lowest man on the totem pole, and the military would often refer to a meeting as a powwow, so they'd be going off to a powwow for a meeting. And so as the national co-chair, I decided to write a report on racism. And
how did the department respond? How did they deal with this report and any alleged racist acts or derogatory remarks when you reported them?
Well, I know they seemed rather alarmed. However, I believe that they knew that a lot of this was still going on, especially when I wrote the report, and I had reached out to a number of the DAIG members to ask if they had anything that they would like to share with me, because I was planning on writing this report. So from what I've heard from other employees is that they had submitted complaints. They had gone through their chain of command to report these incidents. However, a lot of them were brushed under, or the perpetrators would be moved to another base, and quite often they would be promoted. So I believe that they knew this was going on. So when I handed the report to the commander, he had slid it over to his executive assistant and said, "We will take care of this." In the report, there was approximately 14 recommendations, and I cannot tell you today how many of those recommendations have been actioned, but I can guess that there would be at least 4 of them. So yeah, I'm not really sure what has been done so far. And then after reading the recent report that was submitted this year, I was not surprised when I reviewed it to find out that things have actually seemed to have gotten worse in that organization.
Why is it you think that things continue to stay the same?
The culture has not changed. This is something that has been in the culture since the military was created. And, I think that's what needs to be done. They need a huge culture shift.
And what impact did working in this environment have on you personally?
It definitely affected my mental health. I ended up taking quite a bit of time off work, sick leave, for stress-related reasons. I've actually participated in quite a bit of therapy programs to help with my mental health, doing neurotherapy and other types of treatments. So yeah, it has really taken a toll on my mental health. I'm actually, in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been on my healing journey. So I'm in a much better place today. I had many suicidal thoughts when I was working for the military. And yeah, it was just not a very good place to be for quite a long time.
And so what motivated you to eventually launch this class action lawsuit that was filed in October?
I felt that perhaps having the lawsuit would prompt the organization to finally do some serious investigating into how they can make a change. It's not an organization that I can recommend to any of my family members to join right now. So once there is change, then it would certainly be a nice place for me to say to my family, yes, you should go and join the military or become a civilian member and work for that organization. But at this point, I cannot say that to my family.
And so what exactly would you like the claim to achieve, and how optimistic are you that you'll see the change you're asking for?
I would like to see that whole culture shift to make that place more open and accepting of all cultures, colors, and creeds. Make it a more welcoming environment for everybody. Canada is a multicultural country, and the military and national defense have to be more open and accepting of all of those cultures. They have taken steps to do that, but it's been very slow going. The policies always seem to stop a lot of things from moving forward. So I'm hoping that they can make things happen a little bit faster.
Now, I'm already over time, but I want to ask you one more question. This report also talks about white supremacy and neo-Nazism, which your statement of claim also mentions at one point. Were these things that you ever witnessed when you were working within the Defense Department?
I didn't directly witness any of that. However, when I was writing the report in 2016, there was some mention of that.
And how concerned are you to see this still a problem within the military?
I'm concerned because even after I wrote the report, I was living in fear for myself. I was actually I would continually look behind me as I was backing out of my garage. I would be looking like I was actually very uncomfortable for quite some time because I had feared retaliation from people like that.
Okay, well, we have to leave it there. I appreciate you sharing your story with me.
Thank you very much for having me.
None of these allegations have been tested in court. After the break, I'll be joined by retired Sergeant Derek Montour for more on this topic. Welcome back. When the National Defense Advisory Panel on Racism delivered its final verdict last week, it wasn't good. Racism is rampant, the panel says. It's empowered by a colonialist culture, abuse of power, and a toxic, corrosive environment that is repulsing new recruits. Derek Montour joined the Armed Forces in 1989. He hails from the Mohawk territory of Ganawage, where in 1990 the military invaded after warriors seized the Mercier Bridge during the Oka standoff. Montour is a retired sergeant and member of the advisory panel that compiled the report. Welcome to Nation to Nation.
Thank you.
Given your community's history with the Army, what was your personal reaction to what you witnessed during the study?
I looked at it as an opportunity. The Minister of National Defense, Minister Sajan, had contacted me. He had received my name, referred to me at one point about my military experience and my experience with racism while I was in the military. And after some discussion with him, felt that I may be a good addition to the team. And throughout the last year, exploring different avenues and components of the military over this past year was an eye-opener on what some people are experiencing throughout all of it. So for me, it was an opportunity to maybe try to affect change that we're all trying for as Indigenous people, and trying to make change in this land called Canada.
And how frequently did you encounter anti-Indigenous racism during your own military career?
Well, my military career in the Canadian Armed Forces was rather brief. I had joined right out of high school. My mom and dad didn't sign for me to join long-term and said, go to college and try the reserves. I did. I joined the Royal Montreal Regiment, an infantry regiment, and I loved the military. I had wanted to be in the military for a while. So I took to it really well. Actually, at that time in late '89 and in the beginning of 1990, there was probably 5 of us all serving at the same time. But when 1990 hit, we were actually in training for our 2-week summer program when the bridge was closed and our community was surrounded. And I recall experiences of racist slurs, racist remarks. One in particular has always stuck with me, of saying, this is from a fellow soldier who we were ready to lay down our lives with, saying, I hope we go in and kill all them savages. So when you're hearing that from the people who you're supposed to be going into combat with, talking about your mom and your dad and you as savages, it really opens your eyes and made me think, am I doing the right thing? Shortly after that, we were able to go home and we were able to come back from it. And not long after 1990, I joined the United States Marine Corps. And I spent 10 years in the Marine Corps, and I left as a sergeant from that service and moved back home. And since I've been working in social services and community services.
Well, it's a remarkable story. Have things improved over the last 30 years, and why or why not?
Certainly from the conversations we've had for the last year, these types of dialogues still exist. And whether it's the environment that happens, and I think that's part of it, is sometimes there's an environment of permissiveness, that things are allowed to be said and not addressed. And that's really about leadership. And leadership really needs to step up at all levels to try to change that culture where it's not acceptable to make fun or to denigrate or otherwise hurt somebody. And that's just one aspect. Those are the individual areas. A lot of our focus and our approach for the last year was trying to identify systemic discrimination issues. And I think all of us need to acknowledge, and that's, you mentioned in your opening statement, Canada was built on a colonial system. It was built, by settlers, for settlers. How we exist today is still part of Canada and England and the Queen in many ways. So part of what we had to acknowledge and report is, well, where did this come from? Slavery was a reality in Canada. And I think just history alone and normal Canadian citizens understanding history didn't start in this land when the English and the French arrived. History here started many decades before that with our own people. So part of it is just clear education and trying to remove systemic discrimination from the system itself. And we all have to tackle that.
I'd like to switch gears a little bit. This report also says that the presence of white supremacists and extremists in the ranks is growing, not shrinking. Why do these sorts of links continue to dog the armed forces?
We tried to take some recommendations or some opportunities that the defense team can look at to try to address certain areas. And certainly monitoring of how extremists may enter the military, access training, access military weapons or knowledge, and use that to their own ends is a troubling fact, but it's also a reality of how people learn to do these things.
Well, I've got less than a minute for one more question. After all we've heard, should First Nations people join the Canadian military under this current climate? If a young person came to you and said they were thinking about joining the forces, what advice would you give them?
We made a series of recommendations related to that. We found that a lot of focus right now is individual recruitment. And every single person has the right to determine their own future, in my opinion, in our opinion. So a lot of it is leaving that option open. But acceptance before and understanding and accepting while in and changing that culture and environment, I think is critical. Also, how Canada and its military, how they look at their relationship with First Nations people has to be looked at by Canada. Whether it's land, whether it's alliances, whether it's even diplomacy, all of those really align to supporting. So if a young man or a woman, like you said, or trans person comes to me and asks that question, I would first say, talk to your council, talk to your nation leadership, and have them have a conversation. Support it that way, because then it's the nation itself that's creating that and offering that support to that young person as they're embarking on this. Because in some respects, they're representing their First Nation or Métis or Inuit communities.
Okay, Mr. Montour, thanks for your time. It was great to hear your insight on this.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
After another break, I'll discuss Red Dress Day with the Native Women's Association of Canada. Stick around. Welcome back. It's hard to believe it's been 12 years now, because it was back in 2010 that Métis artist Jamie Black put together a collection of red dresses at the University of Winnipeg, symbolizing all the Indigenous women and girls who went missing or were murdered. May 5th is now a national day of action and remembrance, but has the problem improved since that first dress was hung up? To talk about today and other issues affecting Indigenous women, I'm now joined by Lisa Smith, Senior Director of Governance, International and Parliamentary Relations with the Native Women's Association of Canada. Welcome, Ms. Smith.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So what does today mean for you?
Well, as you mentioned, it was in 2010 when the Métis artist had the art exhibit of the empty red dress. And that empty red dress is a powerful image. So it means a lot. And I'm hoping today, on May 5th, that Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike can show their support and stand with all our Indigenous sisters who have been murdered or gone missing.
Do you think hanging up red dresses is having the desired effect in raising awareness in the general Canadian population?
I do, because I do think the image is powerful and impactful. And even on social media today, I'm noticing a lot of uptake and a lot of people posting their red dresses or their version of it. And so I do certainly think that it is having a good impact in terms of awareness in this country.
Is there something more that could be done to get the issue to the forefront of the public's consciousness? We have these days of action and remembrance. We've had the national inquiry. What else could be done?
Well, I think that's a good point that you raised, that we did have a national inquiry. And as you know, on June 3rd, 2019, the National Inquiry's final report released 231 calls for justice. And so, we really need to see movement on implementation. Now we need to focus on implementation. And in that regard, there's something that anyone can do. And, the calls for justice, the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, you know, oftentimes we look at that as obligations of the state, of civil society, but there are things that individuals can do as well. And so wearing a red dress today, for example, is one of them, but it's also just showing solidarity and learning the truth and trying your best to deconstruct your colonial thoughts to reconcile what's going on in this country.
Former commissioners with the MMIWG inquiry, among others, have criticized the government for its slow response to the final report. What will you be looking for when Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller updates us on the progress next month?
I'm looking for action on the National Action Plan. And, you know, we have said it's a national action plan without action. We want to see outcomes. We've done the inquiry, we've done the advocacy, and now we need implementation. So we do want to see movement.
Now, this issue has been debated quite a bit in Ottawa lately. For the past couple of weeks, the House of Commons on the Status of Women Committee has been looking into violence against Indigenous women associated with resource development. Some witnesses argued the federal government must take a bigger role in addressing the problem. On the other hand, these are private corporate actors who are often regulated by the province. What are your thoughts on that issue?
Well, again, if we go back to the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, we have, you know, the government can mandate to evaluate or approve and or monitor development projects to complete gender-based socioeconomic impact assessments on all projects. And so I think, you know, there are things that government can do, that industry can do, and they can do together in terms of before approval of projects, we can ensure the safety of Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse people. That should always be at the forefront in a genocide. You know, that's what the final report said. This is a genocide. There's urgency to this, and there are things that industry and governments can do to protect Indigenous women and girls.
Meanwhile, also this week, a Senate committee revisited the issue of forced sterilization of Indigenous women. A report that came out last year was only 30 pages, and it made just 2 recommendations. What can the federal government do in terms of legislation or other legal solutions to try to address this problem?
Well, it is appalling that, you know, there hasn't been an amendment to the criminal code on this. I mean, you know, we have a protected right under Section 7 of the security of the person. And again, it coincides with the National Inquiry's final report that said that the violence against women, Indigenous women and girls in this country constituted genocide. And, you know, we're even seeing in the international stage that that being repeated under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. So Canada, you know, can commit to its international obligations, and it can update the criminal code, for example, and find other legislative solutions to this. It's a tragic reality, and something needs to be done. And again, there's an urgency.
Okay, Ms. Smith, I really appreciate you taking the time.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
And that's it for us tonight on Nation to Nation. I'm Brett Forster. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.